runway 18, clear to land.
In a populated area near a highway, an Airbus A300 crashes short of the runway.
Tower, did you see that?
Neither pilot has survived.
We're a very small pilot group, so you start thinking about who it may have been and exactly what happened.
After listening to conversations in the cockpit,
We're gonna do vertical speed.
He kept us high.
and running the flight through a simulator,
How'd you miss all this?
investigators are forced to take a different approach.
At 11 a.m., an eyewitness spots her in the hotel restaurant.
You can set yourself up for failure in a safety-critical job like flying an aircraft.
It's an early summer morning when UPS Flight 1354 climbs over Kentucky.
Autopilot 1 command.
Autopilot 1 command.
58-year-old Saria Beal Jr. has been flying with UPS for more than 20 years.
UPS 1354, climb and maintain flight level 280.
280, 1354.
37-year-old First Officer Shanda Fanning has been with the delivery company for 7 years.
They were respected, they were experienced aviation professionals, they were very representative of the type of pilots that UPS hires.
280.
28.
Tonight's flight from Louisville, Kentucky to Birmingham, Alabama takes about an hour.
Overnight cargo is a very time-sensitive product. Everybody's familiar with UPS and their next-day air product. So if we have an airplane that's late, it may affect scores of our outbound flights. We don't have the luxury of booking our packages on the next available flight because the next available flight might not be for 24 hours.
The crew is flying the newest version of the Airbus A300, equipped with advanced computers and flight management systems to assist pilots.
Notice to airmen, runway 24 closed.
Shortly after reaching cruising altitude, the pilots receive a NOTAM, a Notice to Airmen message.
NOTAMs provide information regarding hazards that you may encounter so that there are no surprises en route or when you arrive.
Localizer runway 18 in use. Landing and departing runway 18.
The runway they were expecting is closed for maintenance. They'll have to use an alternate.
They're saying 24 is closed. They want us to take runway 18.
Runway 18? Figures.
I know, especially since we're a little heavy.
Yep. I guess I'll brief it. Briefing guide?
The alternate runway is shorter. With the plane nearly at maximum weight, they'll have to carefully manage their speed and altitude on approach.
Verify VNAV path on the approach chart.
Pilots prefer longer runways because with a shorter runway, there's not a lot of margin for error.
Load the approach into the flight computer.
Landing on runway 18 also involves a more demanding approach, known as a non-precision approach. In a non-precision approach, pilots pre-program the flight computer to follow a virtual glide path or descent profile to the runway threshold.
Non-precision approach is not practiced as much. The only times flight crews ever see them perhaps would be in training, in a simulator, and then maybe once in a while on the line.
Verify the glide path agrees with the approach chart within 1 degree.
Verify approach to 0.1 degrees.
When you're shooting a non-precision approach, your workload increases dramatically. You have to watch your airspeed, you have to watch your altitude.
28 minutes into the flight, UPS 1354 begins its descent towards Birmingham, Alabama.
UPS 1354, descend at pilot's discretion. Maintain 11,000.
The crew is cleared to continue descending to 11,000 feet.
That works. We'll keep it going.
UPS 1354 will keep her going down to 11.
Roger, UPS 1354.
They're generous today. Usually they kind of take you up to 15 and hold you up there.
I know, they hold you up high.
Visibility is poor as the plane descends to 11,000 feet.
If you're flying in the clouds and it's already nighttime, you have a black screen. If you look out, there's nothing out there. It's the black abyss, if you will.
UPS 1354 Heavy, Birmingham Tower, descend and maintain 2,500. Runway 24 is still closed. You want 18?
The controller confirms that the crew cannot use the airport's longer runway.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, 18 will work.
Copy that. Turn right 10 degrees. Join the localizer.
Okay, turn right, join the localizer.
The last few minutes before landing can be very busy for the flight crew. A lot's going on, and you have to be at the top of your game.
Flaps 15.
Speed checks?
Flaps 15.
8 miles from the airport, the crew configures the plane for landing.
UPS 1354 Heavy, runway 18, clear to land.
18, clear to land, 1354.
Speed brakes armed.
Ignition continuous relight. Landing checklist is complete.
5 miles from the runway, the captain realizes something's not right.
Unbelievable. Too high.
The autopilot hasn't initiated its final descent to the airport. The captain tries to get the plane back on its programmed glide path. If the plane remains too high this close to the runway, the crew could overshoot it.
Instruments cross-checked. No flags.
The first officer sees no problems with the descent.
2 miles to go. I've got the runway in sight out there, 12 o'clock.
Got the runway in sight.
Autopilot's off.
The captain prepares to fly the plane manually to touchdown.
Pilots switch off the autopilot to land the airplane manually in this situation of a non-precision approach. It's a required maneuver to actually manually land the aircraft.
As they get closer to the airport,
Did I hit something?
Caution.
Oh, no.
Rain. Too low. Rain.
the pilots can't control the plane as it cuts through a small grove. UPS Flight 1354 crashes just 1 mile short of the runway.
Tower, did you see that?
Yes. Airport 12, there's been a crash. UPS 1354 Heavy crashed on the hill. Attention, aircraft crash, 3 miles final runway 18.
Rescue crews rush to extinguish the flames of UPS Flight 1354. Despite the plane coming down in a populated area and crossing a highway in Birmingham, Alabama, no one on the ground is injured. Tragically, both pilots are killed. Within hours, the National Transportation Safety Board begins the investigation.
Looks like the plane struck some trees here, then crashed into the ground here, and then slid for 1,400 feet. Did we find the nose?
The wreckage is spread over a large area.
Yes, I believe we did. Yeah, it's here.
Investigators look for the 4 corners of the aircraft to determine if the entire plane has reached the accident site.
4 corners refer to the nose, both wings, and tail. You want to take all of them into account, just because it tells such a story about how the airplane struck.
Tail and right wing were found here.
Fragments of the left wing were found here.
All 4 corners are at the crash site. The plane was intact until it hit the ground.
It wasn't a structural problem. Did anyone see the accident?
If the plane was intact, investigators wonder if the pilots were having difficulty controlling it prior to impact.
No eyewitnesses. Just what we documented at the crash site.
Let's look at how they hit those trees.
Impact marks on trees may provide additional clues.
It's critical for investigators to look at all the things that this aircraft may have struck. In this particular accident, we know that the airplane had flown through trees. When you look at those trees, you want to see what the attitude of the aircraft was. Was it wings level? Was it rolled one direction or the other direction? Was it a very steep pitch attitude?
What were the height of the impact marks?
Tree 14, 43.1 feet.
Investigators use the height of the impact marks to determine the orientation of the plane when it struck the trees.
The plane is level. These guys had control of the aircraft.
Absolutely.
If the pilots were in control of a structurally sound plane, what else could have caused them to crash short of the runway?
Maybe the engines failed.
It's imperative to look at the engines to give us an idea of thrust levels. And surprisingly, if the engines are intact, more or less, you can tell this.
Let's start with the blades.
Investigators examined the A300's engines to see if they were generating power at the time of the accident.
Blades were spinning.
You can look in the front of the engine, and if the fan blades, for instance, are bent in the opposite direction of rotation, That means that when the aircraft's engine struck the ground, it was on.
Debris is shredded.
The debris ingested during impact confirms to investigators that the engines were functioning.
Was an engine failure.
Maybe they ran into a storm.
With no real leads to explain why the plane crashed, the team considers if weather was a possible factor.
If the weather was poor and the pilots couldn't see the ground well at all, then perhaps they made mistakes on the approach itself.
This is the weather from 2 minutes before the accident.
No storms. Wind is calm. This all looks pretty good.
Wait, there is a broken cloud ceiling at the airport, 1,000 feet. This is the ground, and this is the cloud cover.
The cloud ceiling is the distance from the ground to the base of the lowest clouds.
That's pretty low.
Flight 1354 would only descend from clouds at 1,000 feet.
What was the decision altitude for their approach?
The decision altitude is the altitude at which the crew must be able to see the runway, or else abandon their approach.
Decision heights, they're all pretty much a hard floor, especially in the weather, should not be broken. You should not go below the decision altitude unless you see the runway.
Decision altitude was 1,200 feet.
If the clouds didn't break until 1,000 feet, they wouldn't have seen the runway for their decision altitude.
So why didn't they turn around?
That low to the ground, at night, you don't have time to hit and hope. You have to go around and get it together and try it again.
Did lack of visibility cause the pilots to descend too rapidly and crash short of the runway?
Maybe the controller knows something.
Were they concerned at all about the approach?
Investigators interview the air traffic controller to understand why the pilots of Flight 1354 descended so low while in thick clouds.
They didn't say anything. Everything seemed fine.
The air traffic controller can tell the investigator what he heard from the flight crew, if they sounded or reported anything unusual, anything that he wasn't expecting.
Was there anything out of the ordinary that night?
Yeah. The runway they were scheduled to land on was closed, so they had to use the alternate. It's a non-precision approach.
UPS 1354 Heavy.
Birmingham Tower, descend and maintain 2,500. Runway 24 is still closed.
You want 18?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. 18 will work.
So they shot a non-precision with no eyes on the runway.
Knowing what the weather was, knowing what the crew thought the weather was, knowing what information they were given about the weather, told us a lot about how they executed the approach.
Thank you.
Why did the crew continue their non-precision approach in heavy clouds?
Do we have the data from the flight recorders?
Those two black boxes are very critical to investigators because they're electronic witnesses.
Here's the approach they should have taken. The plan was to come in slow and steady at about a 3-degree angle.
Using the FDR data, investigators reconstruct the final approach path of Flight 1354.
Here's what they actually did.
In this particular instance, the critical phase of flight, which was approach, were they doing what they were supposed to be doing? Investigators can compare that then against what the airplane was actually doing.
The crew's approach was far from a steady descent.
The controller cleared them to 2,500 feet.
But they leveled out a little higher than that, which shouldn't be a problem.
Flaps 15.
Speed checks. Flaps 15.
UPS 1354 heavy, runway 18, clear to land.
Looks like they fly past the descent profile they pre-programmed into the computer here.
Try to get back on track, but end up descending steeply below the flight path and never recover.
How fast were they coming down?
Did the crew descend too quickly as they tried to get back on track?
Check this out.
Wow, 1,500 feet per minute. The descent is way too fast so close to the ground.
They confirmed that the plane descended at a rate outside safety guidelines for a final approach. It's an important clue.
Any pilot looking at this would understand that they were descending way too fast, this close to the runway.
You would think that the pilot would have started bottoming out, that is, slowing that rate of descent a lot sooner than he did.
What would make him think they need to descend that fast to get back on the glide path?
Investigators dig deeper into the FDR data.
That's a strange way to program the autopilot.
The team notices that just after the plane flew past the descent profile, the autopilot is set to a mode called vertical speed. The mode is used to descend quickly at higher altitudes, not on final approach.
This complicates the job of the pilot very, very much. He has less time to think about things. He has less time to react to things. So it's simply not a good thing.
Why were they descending so quickly, so close to the ground?
The FDR data only tells investigators what the pilots did, not why.
We need the cockpit voice recorder.
When you add to that what the pilots were saying, and you match that with what the airplane was doing, investigators have a pretty complete picture of what was going on.
Okay, let's hear it.
UPS 1350.
The cockpit voice recorder, it tells us, more or less, what's going through the minds of the flight crew.
Runway 18.
They listen as the pilots make their vertical speed adjustments while they configure their landing.
To land, 1354. Speed brakes armed. Ignition continuous relay. Landing checklist is complete.
Unbelievable. Too high.
Let's see. You're in vertical speed.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a vertical speed. He kept us high.
Hold it there. Captain thinks the plane didn't lock onto the programmed descent profile because the controller kept them too high. Bring up the recommended altitude.
Investigators check the altitude the computer required the plane to reach before commencing the automated descent.
2,300 feet. That's only a few hundred feet too high.
Even though the captain believed the plane didn't descend because the controller kept them too high, the computer should have initiated its programmed descent at that higher altitude.
Maybe there was a problem with the flight computer.
Verify the glide path agrees with the approach chart within 1 degree.
Did a malfunction in the flight computer used to program the autopilot lead to the crash of UPS Flight 1354?
Verify approach, 0.1 degrees.
The flight management system to an airline pilot in an airline operation like this is very critical because it is the automation. It is the typical way of flying a large aircraft. If you have bad data in, that data will cause bad things to happen.
Okay. Let's hook this up.
Investigators recover the flight computer's memory card from the wreckage. They prepare to test it for signs of errors or malfunctions.
The investigators went to great pains to figure out what exactly was loaded into the flight management computer. It was damaged, so they had to remove the motherboard and place it in a functioning unit and actually read it out.
This should tell us if the computer was working.
If the flight computer was operational, investigators should be able to download its memory.
It's working.
Turned out that there was nothing wrong with the flight management computer. But had there been, that could have been a very important part of the accident sequence.
The computer was working.
Looks like they programmed it. Final approach is armed for a gradual descent of 3 degrees. Wait a minute. They've got 2 separate destinations programmed. They forgot to clear the conflict.
They discover the crew missed a step in planning their route to Birmingham Airport. They failed to clear a previously programmed destination. It's a troubling find.
You can load a flight plan into it, and then if you deviate from that particular flight plan, the flight management computer doesn't really know what's going on and can put out false data, and that's called a discontinuity.
The crew programmed the plane to fly directly to Birmingham Airport. 20 miles out, they needed to clear their flight path and program a specific approach to runway 18. But the crew didn't clear the initial plan, which created the discontinuity, a confusion in the system.
So there was a conflict between where the pilots told the airplane to start the approach and where the computer knew the approach had to start, and that was a flight plan discontinuity.
That's why the autopilot wouldn't initiate the descent path.
The captain basically was chasing the incorrect guidance that the display was telling him by trying to descend as quickly as he could when there was no reason for it.
The team knows the crew didn't clear the conflict. The question is, why?
Let's listen to what was going on when they should have cleared it.
They focus on the moment the crew got the instruction from the controller to go to runway 18.
Okay, here it is.
You want 18?
The controller reminds the crew that they must use an alternate runway.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. 18 will work.
Copy that.
Turn right 10 degrees, join the localizer.
Okay. Turn right, join the localizer. I don't think we have many choices if runway 6 is closed.
At that moment, the crew should have cleared the discontinuity and reprogrammed the approach.
I know. What can we do?
I'm like, are you going to unroll another one out there for us real quick?
The crew make a few light-hearted comments.
Gear down.
Gear down. Speed checks.
There was some glad handing a little bit, some humorous comments being made there. They should have probably knuckled down and focused strictly on what needed to be done.
The first officer gets distracted and forgets to clear the discontinuity.
Look, lapses in concentration happen. That's why you have 2 pilots. But did the captain really miss this too?
Pilots are meant to monitor each other to catch mistakes. So how did they both miss such a critical step?
It's just 5 minutes before the accident. Plenty of time to see the mistake.
For investigators, they have to try and determine why didn't they see this discontinuity? Why didn't they remedy it?
What exactly were they seeing on their displays during this 5 minutes?
Let's run it through the simulator.
The simulations are very helpful to investigators. If the accident occurred because of crew action or inaction, simulations can tell investigators what the crew encountered.
Take it to 442, where they should have cleared the discontinuity.
Investigators prepare to see exactly what the pilots saw during the final 5 minutes of the flight. They scan the cockpit instruments for clues as to why the first officer didn't correct her error.
In this case, the first officer's job really was to glue her eyes to the instruments. She was the non-flying pilot, and that was really her only job.
I know. What else can we do? Gear down.
Gear down.
Have a look at this. It's telling you to take 2 different approaches.
When the first officer didn't clear the discontinuity, the flight computer displayed 2 routes to the airport.
That ought to tell you something's wrong.
There should never be 2. You can't be 2 places at one time.
It should have been a single line, but the computer couldn't figure out, because of the discontinuity, where to start the approach.
The discontinuity message is right here on the flight computer, too.
Speed brakes armed. Ignition continuous relight. Landing checklist is complete.
Unbelievable. They kept us high.
How did she miss all this?
They conclude that there were plenty of signs telling the pilots what they had done wrong.
Did I hit something?
But they still don't understand how they failed to notice them in time to prevent this tragic accident.
Oh, God.
You can have information buried in an instrument that isn't in your focal view or in your peripheral vision. That's one thing. But if it's prominently displayed and you don't see it, the question that we as investigators have to answer is, why not?
Investigators have identified serious piloting errors in the crew of Flight 1354.
How qualified were they?
They study the pilot's personnel records.
Captain's got more than 3,000 hours on the A300. Passed all his latest checks. Looks good.
First officer's a little new to the aircraft. She's got plenty of experience. Ticks all the boxes.
This approach was certainly not beyond their abilities. They had good records.
Any other clues?
This could be something.
If you're flying this time of day, you always feel fatigued.
Yep.
I mean, I was out and I slept today. I slept good.
Me too.
And when my alarm went off, I am still thinking I am so tired.
I know. Exactly.
She was tired.
Mm-hmm. Question is, how tired?
Did the first officer get enough rest before the flight?
Being fatigued, it's been characterized like being inebriated. You can see something, you can recognize that there's an issue there, but you're not really analyzing the gravity of the situation.
The schedules that cargo pilots fly can be very punishing, very demanding, primarily because we operate throughout the nighttime hours. We know that fatigue is a significant flight risk.
She had a 14-hour rest period before her final shift.
How much rest did she actually get?
There's enough analytical data that demonstrates that a human needs this amount of rest, period. You can set reasonable rest periods, and it's then up to the human to abide by that rest period in a safety-critical job like flying an aircraft.
It says here she swiped the key into her hotel room at just after 6 a.m., but records show she was on her cell and tablet at 6:49 a.m. At 11 a.m., an eyewitness spots her in the hotel restaurant.
Did she head back to her room for more rest after that?
She didn't swipe back into her hotel room until 3:22 p.m. But she was on her cell phone and tablet until 5 p.m.
From the evidence that investigators got, it's clear she did not manage her rest period effectively, and she could have.
So it looks like she had a rest period between 5 and 6:30, but then she was back on her personal devices and called her husband before reporting for duty at 8:30 p.m.
She can't have slept more than 5.5 hours in her 14-hour layover.
Yeah.
5.5 hours in fits and starts is less than the recommended 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep.
Okay, turn right, join the localizer. I don't think we have many choices if runway 6 is closed.
Interpreting information during a non-precision approach when you're fatigued, when you have to do other duties, such as call out altitudes and airspeeds and so on and so forth, is very difficult.
Investigators conclude that the first officer's fatigue likely contributed to this accident.
The problem is that we've had a number of accidents in the cargo industry that have been related in some way, shape, or form to fatigue.
The first accident that actually referenced fatigue was almost 20 years ago at Guantanamo Bay.
One last flight, guys.
In AIA Flight 808, the crew had been awake for 15 hours before flying cargo to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The flight ended in a horrific accident. The NTSB's findings in that investigation changed the industry's view of fatigue.
It shined light on the issue of fatigue being, as much of a safety risk as a mechanical issue on an airplane.
Pilots are no longer expected to fly fatigued, yet 15 accidents have been attributed to fatigue between 1993 and 2013.
Fatigue is real. We need to recognize it. We need to mitigate it.
Investigators now know that the first officer's fatigue played a part in this accident. But a question still remains.
Why didn't the captain catch the first officer's mistakes? Was he fatigued too?
Captain had 7 days off. Yeah, he went to bed early, had a nap.
Records show the captain of UPS 1354 met the required amount of rest before the flight.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a vertical speed. He kept us high.
The captain, he had some days off, and so he should have been well rested. We don't know all of his activities, but he should have been the most rested pilot.
If not fatigue, then what?
Investigators need to dig deeper. they return to the CVR transcript for insight into the captain's frame of mind.
Check this out. The captain mentions being too high 4, 5, 6 times.
For a captain to be so fixated on that one flight parameter puts up a red flag for investigators.
Sounds like television.
The captain was very focused on his altitude. He said many, many times, we're high, we need to get down. When you become that focused, everything else kind of flies out the window.
They did seem to be fixated on the fact that they were too high, and then at some point, of course, they were far too low.
Investigators now know what happened to UPS Flight 1354.
Okay, turn right, join the localizer. I don't think we have many choices if runway 6 is closed.
A tired first officer misses a critical step in preparing for the approach into Birmingham.
We know she was fatigued. We know that the non-precision approaches increase the workload on the pilots.
And misses the cues telling her she made the mistake.
Finals activated.
If you put them all together, the workload, the fatigue, her role in helping the pilot by monitoring the instruments, she never recognized that there was a discontinuity.
Because of her mistake, the plane overflies the pre-programmed descent path.
Unbelievable. He kept us high.
Safety is compromised with distraction, complacency, the fact that, you get zoned out, you get focused, tunnel vision.
A captain already fixated on altitude misses the first officer's error.
Let's see. You're in vertical speed.
Yeah, we're gonna do a vertical speed. He kept us high.
Forces the plane into a steep descent to get back on track.
They failed to recognize that the automation wasn't doing what they thought it would be doing.
And never recovers.
Great.
They realized that they were in danger only seconds before the accident. By that point, it was too late.
In their final report, the NTSB recommends that cargo operators require a crew briefing on the threat of fatigue before each flight.
If you're fatigued, you gotta call it out, because your performance as a human degrades. And while we want to push through and accomplish the mission, the problem is you can set yourself up or your crewmate for failure because of your lack of performance.
Since our accident in Birmingham, the company has done a fantastic job in the training department. We've also negotiated for sleep rooms so we can go take a mid-duty nap during the sorting of the packages process. Our pilots will tell you they're a game changer.
It took a lot of little errors by all the major participants in this flight to cause this airplane to crash. And in that respect, it's really unfortunate. It makes this accident so tragic.